The morning mist still clung to the cobblestones when the guards dragged Senna through the palace gates and threw her onto the road like refuse. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. Those things had proven useless hours ago when King Valdric of Vanthros, the man who had sworn to make her his queen, had looked through her as if she were nothing more than smoke. "You are no longer welcome in this kingdom," he had said. Not angry, not even cold, just empty. As if the months of courtship, the promises whispered in moonlit gardens, the way his eyes had once softened when he looked at her, none of it had ever existed. And Senna didn't know why. She had woken in chains. She had been dragged from her chambers before dawn. And the Alpha she had loved, the king she had trusted with her deepest secret, had banished her without a single explanation. Now she knelt in the dirt beyond the gates, watching the sun rise over a kingdom that had just become her enemy. Her traveling cloak was thin, her purse was empty. And the road ahead led through the thornwood, a forest that belonged to Valdric's greatest rival. No one survived the thornwood alone. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps Valdric wanted her dead, but lacked the courage to kill her himself. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that death might have been kinder than what waited for her in those trees, because by nightfall, the rival king would find her. And the moment Drystan of Thornhaven laid eyes on the woman his enemy had thrown away, everything both kingdoms believed about fate, about curses, about the bonds between wolves would begin to unravel. Neither of them understood yet that this was not an ending. It was the beginning of something neither could survive alone. The road through the thornwood was not meant for travelers. Senna had heard the stories since childhood. The forest that separated Vanthros from Thornhaven was ancient, hungry, and answered to only one master, the Alpha King whose bloodline had ruled those shadows for 1,000 years, King Drystan, the Frost Wolf. The ruler Valdric had warned her about in hushed tones, as if even speaking his name might summon something terrible. "He is not like us," Valdric had said once, his golden eyes serious. "His wolves are savage, his court is brutal, and he himself is barely human anymore." Senna had believed him then. She had believed everything Valdric told her. Now she walked his enemy's road with nothing but the clothes on her back and the bitter taste of betrayal coating her tongue. The morning had given way to afternoon, and afternoon was bleeding into dusk. Her feet ached. Her throat burned with thirst, and with every step deeper into the thornwood, she felt the shadows pressing closer, watching and waiting. She was not alone here. She could feel eyes tracking her from the darkness between the trees. Wolves, not the wild kind. These moved with purpose, with intelligence. They were circling her, cutting off her retreat, herding her forward like prey. Senna's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to keep walking. Running would only trigger the chase instinct, and she was too exhausted to outrun anything. "You're a long way from Vanthros, little wolf." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Deep, calm, threaded with an amusement that made her skin prickle. Senna stopped, her hands curled into fists at her sides. From the shadows ahead, a figure emerged. He was tall, taller than Valdric, broader in the shoulders. His hair was black as a moonless night, falling past his jaw in careless waves. And his eyes, when they found hers, were the pale blue of winter ice, sharp and assessing and utterly unreadable. Behind him, a dozen wolves materialized from the trees, massive beasts, their fur ranging from silver to charcoal, their eyes fixed on her with predatory focus. "King Drystan," Senna said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, his head tilted slightly. "You know me. Everyone knows the Frost Wolf." Something flickered across his face. Not quite a smile, but close. "And yet you walked into my forest anyway. Either you're very brave or very foolish." "I didn't have much choice." "No." He took a step closer, and she forced herself not to retreat. "I don't imagine you did." He studied her for a long moment, those ice-blue eyes tracing her face, her disheveled hair, the dirt staining her traveling cloak. She knew what she must look like. A beggar. A refugee. Certainly not the future queen she had been just this morning. "You're Valdrick's chosen," Dristan said finally. Not a question. Senna's jaw tightened. "I was. And now? Now I am nothing." The words scraped her throat like broken glass, because they were true. She had no kingdom, no family, and no mate. She had been stripped of everything that defined her in the space of a single sunrise. Dristan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his scent, a subtle warming beneath the frost. "Valdrick threw you away," he said slowly. "The woman he paraded before every court in the realm. The woman he swore would bear his heirs." His eyes narrowed. "Why?" Senna's blood turned to ice, because she knew why. She knew exactly why Valdrick had looked at her with such emptiness this morning. Someone had told him her secret, the one thing she had hidden from everyone except him. Someone had told him what she really was. "I don't know," she lied. Dristan's gaze sharpened. He didn't believe her. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his wolves shifted restlessly behind him. But he didn't press. Instead, he turned and began walking back toward the darkness of the trees. "Wait," Senna called. "Where are you going?" "Home." He didn't look back. "And unless you prefer to spend the night as dinner for the wild things in this forest, I suggest you follow." She stared at his retreating back. "You're taking me with you?" Now he did stop. He turned just enough to look at her over his shoulder, and in the dying light, his eyes seemed to glow. "You're on my land, little wolf. You became my responsibility the moment you crossed that border." A pause. "Besides, I'm very curious to learn what could possibly make the great King Valdrick throw away something so valuable." Before she could respond, he disappeared into the shadows. Senna stood frozen, her mind racing. This was madness. Walking into the Frostwolf's den was suicide. Everyone knew the rivalry between Vanthros and Thornhaven was ancient, bloody, and unforgiving. And if Dristan discovered what she was, what she could do, he might kill her himself. But the alternative was dying alone in this forest. Cold over death, she thought grimly. And she followed the Frostwolf into the dark. The castle of Thornhaven rose from the mist like something out of a nightmare. Senna had seen grand palaces before. Valdrick's seat of power was all golden spires and sunlit marble, designed to inspire awe and devotion. But this was different. Thornhaven was carved from black stone that seemed to drink the moonlight. Its towers spiraled toward the sky like grasping claws, and the mist that swirled around its base never quite dissipated, as if the castle itself was breathing. It should have terrified her. Instead, Senna felt an unexpected sense of recognition, as if some part of her had always known this place existed. I had always been meant to find it. "Welcome to my home," Dristan said beside her. His voice held no warmth, but no cruelty either. Just that same measured calm he'd maintained since finding her in the forest. The carriage they rode in, she'd been too exhausted to walk the final miles, rolled through the massive iron gates. Servants appeared immediately, their expressions carefully blank as they took in their king's unexpected guest. Senna could only imagine what they thought. A woman from the enemy kingdom, disheveled and dirty, arriving in the dead of night with their sovereign. The whispers would start within the hour. Dristan helped her down from the carriage himself, his hand steady and cold as ice beneath her fingers. She flinched at the temperature, and something flickered across his face, there and gone before she could identify it. "You'll be given chambers?" he said, releasing her hand. "Food, clothing, whatever you require." "And in exchange?" He paused, studying her. "We'll discuss terms tomorrow. Tonight, you rest." "I don't understand." Senna shook her head. "I'm your enemy's former betrothed. Bringing me here is an act of war." "Is it?" Dristan's head tilted. "As I understand it, you were publicly rejected and banished. Valdrick made his position very clear. You belong to no one now." The words cut deeper than she'd expected. She forced herself not to react. "That doesn't explain why you're helping me." For a long moment, Drystan didn't answer. Then he leaned closer, close enough that she could see the unusual striations in his pale eyes, the way they seemed to fracture the light like ice crystals. "Perhaps I simply enjoy taking things Valdric has discarded," he murmured. "Perhaps I want to understand why he discarded them in the first place." His breath was cold against her cheek. Not the warmth she'd grown accustomed to from Valdric's proximity, but something else entirely, a chill that seemed to radiate from his very core. "Or perhaps," Drystan continued, straightening, "I recognize when fate has placed something interesting on my doorstep, and I am wise enough not to turn it away." Before Senna could respond, he was striding toward the castle entrance, his black cloak billowing behind him. "Caius will see to your needs," he called without looking back. "I expect you in my study after breakfast." Then he was gone. A man appeared at her elbow. Older, silver-haired, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "My lady," he said, bowing slightly. "I am Caius, steward of Thornhaven. If you'll follow me." Senna followed in a daze. The interior of the castle was as imposing as its exterior, all dark stone and flickering torchlight and shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. But there was also unexpected beauty here. Tapestries depicting moonlit hunts, silver sconces shaped like howling wolves, windows of stained glass that turned the torchlight into fractured rainbows. Caius led her up a winding staircase and down a long corridor before stopping at a heavy wooden door. "Your chambers, my lady." He pushed the door open. "A bath is being drawn as we speak, and I've had clothing sent up. Is there anything else you require tonight?" Senna stepped inside and stopped breathing. The room was beautiful. A canopied bed draped in silver and midnight blue, a fireplace already crackling with warmth, windows overlooking the misty forests below. After months in Valdric's golden palace, this felt like stepping into a different world entirely. A world that somehow felt more real. "This is too much," she managed. Something warm flickered in Caius's eyes. "His Majesty was very specific about your accommodations. He wanted you comfortable." "Why?" The question burst out before she could stop it. "I'm no one. I'm less than no one. You are a guest of the king," Caius interrupted gently. "Whatever you were before, here you are under his protection, and that means something in Thornhaven." He bowed again and retreated, pulling the door closed behind him. Senna stood alone in the beautiful room, her mind spinning. This didn't make sense. None of it made sense. Drystan was supposed to be a monster, a savage king who ruled through fear and brutality. That's what Valdric had told her. That's what everyone believed. But monsters didn't give refugees silk sheets and crackling fires. Monsters didn't look at damaged things with curiosity instead of disgust. She walked to the window and stared out at the mist-shrouded forest. Somewhere beyond those trees was Vanthros. Somewhere beyond those trees was the man she had loved, who had thrown her away without explanation. "What did you tell him?" Senna thought, her hands curling against the cold glass, because someone had talked. Someone had revealed her secret. And there was only one person besides Valdric who knew the truth. Her half-sister, Marin, the sister who had always wanted what Senna had. The sister who had smiled so sweetly while sliding knives into her back. "I'll find out what you did," Senna promised silently, "and when I do, you'll pay for every moment I've suffered." But first, she had to survive whatever King Drystan had planned for her. A knock at the door made her turn. Servants entered with a copper tub, steam rising from the hot water they poured into it. They moved efficiently, silently, leaving bath oils and soft towels before departing. Senna sank into the water and let the heat work into her exhausted muscles. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know what the Frost Wolf wanted from her, or whether his curiosity would turn to violence once he learned what she really was. But for the first time since dawn, she wasn't running. And that would have to be enough. Morning came cold and gray, mist pressing against the windows like something alive. Senna dressed in the clothing that had been left for her, a gown of deep plum velvet that fit as if it had been made specifically for her measurements. She wondered whose it had been originally, then decided she didn't want to know. Caius appeared at her door precisely at the appointed hour, his expression warm but unreadable. "His Majesty awaits in his study, my lady." The walk through the castle was longer than she expected. Thornhaven was massive, a labyrinth of corridors and staircases and rooms that seemed to multiply the deeper she went. Servants paused to stare as she passed, their whispers trailing behind her like smoke. "Who is she?" "She was Valdric's betrothed. Can you believe it?" "Why would His Majesty bring her here?" Senna kept her chin high and her expression neutral. She'd learned long ago that showing weakness only invited more cruelty. Caius stopped before a set of double doors carved with wolves and roses intertwined. He knocked once, then pushed them open. "Lady Senna, Your Majesty." The study was smaller than she expected, intimate almost. Books lined every wall, stacked in precarious towers that threatened to collapse at any moment. A fire burned low in the hearth, and maps covered every surface: the desk, the chairs, even parts of the floor. Drystan stood by the window, silhouetted against the gray light. In daylight, he was somehow even more striking than he'd been in the darkness of the forest. The sharp planes of his face, the carved perfection of his jaw, the way his pale eyes seemed to see straight through to her marrow. He was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, dangerous and cold and impossible to look away from. "Leave us," he said to Caius. The steward bowed and retreated. The door clicked shut. Silence stretched between them, heavy and expectant. "Sit," Dristan said finally, gesturing to a chair near the fire. Senna sat, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. He didn't sit. Instead, he began to pace slowly, circling her like a wolf sizing up prey. She forced herself not to track his movements, to stare straight ahead at the dancing flames. "I've been considering your situation," Drystan said. His voice was thoughtful, almost casual. "A woman of noble blood, publicly rejected by a king, cast out of his kingdom without resources or protection. By all rights, you should be dead already. I'm harder to kill than I look." "Clearly." He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Which brings me to my curiosity. What is it about you, Senna of Vanthros, that made Valdric so afraid he needed to banish you immediately? Without trial, without explanation, without even allowing you to collect your belongings. I told you I don't— Please." He held up a hand. "Don't insult my intelligence with lies. You know exactly why he threw you away. And I suspect it's the same reason you refused to shift during your time at his court." Senna's blood froze. "Oh yes," Drystan continued, watching her reaction with sharp interest. "I had my people gather intelligence the moment I brought you here. Valdric's mysterious betrothed who charmed the entire court but never once revealed her wolf. Rumors flew, of course, that you were packless, that you were cursed, that perhaps you had no wolf at all. I have a wolf," Senna said quietly. "I don't doubt it. What I doubt is whether that wolf is something Valdric could accept." He leaned closer, and his scent washed over her, pine and frost and something darker underneath. "So tell me, little wolf, what are you hiding?" Senna met his gaze. Her pulse thundered in her ears, so loud she was certain he could hear it. She had two choices: lie and hope he never discovered the truth, or tell him now and face whatever consequences came. Valdric had known her secret. Valdric had sworn it didn't matter. And then, Valdric had thrown her away. What reason did she have to trust this king would be any different? "Why do you want to know?" she asked instead of answering. Drystan's eyes flickered. "Because I'm considering making you an offer. And I prefer to know exactly what I'm bargaining for." "An offer?" He straightened and resumed his pacing. "You need protection, a home, resources, all things I can provide. In exchange for what?" "In exchange for becoming my queen." The words hit her like a physical blow. She stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "Your queen," she repeated flatly. "My kingdom requires an heir. I require a mate. And you," he gestured at her, "are a woman of noble blood with no other options. It's a practical arrangement. You don't even know me. I know you're educated, composed, and survived a night in my forest without losing your mind. I know Valdric chose you from hundreds of eligible women across 4 kingdoms. I know that whatever secret you're hiding was enough to make a sitting king panic." His eyes narrowed. "You're interesting, Senna. Ye and I find very few things interesting anymore." Senna's mind raced. This was insane. She'd been in this castle less than a day and he was proposing marriage? "There are conditions," she said slowly, buying time. "Naturally. I won't be a prisoner. I won't be paraded around for your political advantage, and I won't—" She hesitated. "I won't be forced into anything I don't choose." Drystan's expression didn't change. Agreed. Too easy. It was too easy. "Why me?" she pressed. "You could have any woman in your kingdom, any princess from any court. Why would you want your enemy's rejected betrothed?" Something shifted in his pale eyes. Just for a moment she saw something beneath the ice. Something old and tired and achingly alone. "Because rejected things tend to understand each other," he said quietly. Then the mask was back, smooth and cold as ever. He stepped back before she could find words, his expression smoothing into its usual detachment. "You don't have to decide now," he continued briskly. "Take time, consider your options, but understand that my offer has an expiration. Word of your presence here will spread. When Valdric learns where you are, he will demand your return, if only to ensure you can never be used against him. And if I refuse your offer, then I will give you gold, supplies, and safe passage to the border of your choosing. You can disappear into whatever life you can build for yourself." He paused. "But you will leave Thornhaven alone." Alone. The word echoed in her chest. She had been alone her entire life. Even surrounded by her family, she had been alone. Even held in Valdric's arms, she had been alone. Because no one had ever seen the real her. And the one time she dared to reveal herself, she'd been cast out like garbage. Could she do it again? Could she trust another king with her truth? "I need to think," she said. "Of course." Drystan inclined his head. "Caius will show you around the castle, the library, the gardens, whatever you wish to explore. Consider yourself free to go where you please." He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "One more thing," he said without turning. "A messenger arrived this morning from Vanthros." Senna's stomach dropped. "It seems news of your disappearance has caused quite a stir at Valdric's court. His advisors are demanding to know where you are. His generals are muttering about war." A pause. "And Valdric himself has sent a personal query, asking if I've seen any sign of his former betrothed." "What did you tell him?" Drystan finally looked at her over his shoulder, and for the first time, she saw something that might have been a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I told him I hadn't seen you yet, but I expect that to change very soon." He opened the door and stepped through. "Someone is coming, Senna. Whatever you decide, decide quickly." The door closed behind him, leaving her alone with the crackling fire and the weight of an impossible choice. 3 days passed in a blur of exploration and contemplation. Senna wandered the halls of Thornhaven like a ghost, learning its secrets one corridor at a time. The library that stretched across an entire wing, its shelves groaning under the weight of texts older than the kingdom itself. The gardens that somehow bloomed despite the eternal mist, flowers of silver and midnight blue that released their fragrance only after dark. The training yards where Drystan's wolves sparred with brutal efficiency, their movements choreographed violence, and everywhere she went, whispers followed. "She's still here. His Majesty hasn't sent her away yet. Do you think he'll actually—" The conversations died whenever she drew near, but the curiosity in their eyes never faded. She was an oddity, a puzzle, a disruption in their carefully ordered world. On the fourth morning, Senna made her decision. She found Drystan in his study, exactly where she expected him to be. He looked up from his documents as she entered, those ice-pale eyes tracking her approach with unreadable focus. "You've decided," he said. Not a question. "Yes." "And?" Senna took a breath. "I accept your offer, but I have one additional condition." Drystan set down his quill and leaned back in his chair. "I'm listening." "My secret," she said carefully. "Whatever it is you think I'm hiding, I'm not ready to reveal it." "Not yet. Perhaps not ever." She met his gaze directly. "If you marry me blind. No demands to know what I am. No attempts to uncover what I'm concealing. Can you accept that?" A shadow of surprise passed through his expression, followed by something deeper. Intrigue. Perhaps even respect. "You're asking me to take a mate whose nature is unknown to me." "Yes." "That's extraordinarily dangerous." "So is everything else about this arrangement?" A long silence stretched between them. Her chest tightened with each passing second, but she refused to look away. This was her line in the sand. If he couldn't accept this, she would take her chances alone. Finally, Drystan nodded slowly. "Very well. Your secret remains your own until you choose to share it." He paused. "But understand this. I will protect you regardless of what that secret is. When you are my queen, you are under my absolute protection. Whatever you're running from, whoever hurt you, they will never touch you again." The certainty in his voice made her throat tight. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you promise that when you don't even know what you're protecting?" Drystan rose from his chair and circled the desk until he stood before her. Up close, she could see the faint shadows beneath his eyes, the tension in his jaw that never quite relaxed. "Because I recognize survival when I see it," he said quietly. "And you, Senna, you have been surviving alone for far too long." Before she could respond, he stepped back, and his expression smoothed into its usual mask. "The ceremony will take place tomorrow evening. My court will witness our union and acknowledge you as their queen. After that, Valdric's claims on you, whatever they may be, become irrelevant." "Tomorrow?" Senna's voice cracked. "That's necessary." His tone left no room for argument. "Word has spread faster than anticipated. Valdric's ambassador arrives the day after tomorrow. By then, you will already be bound to me, and there will be nothing he can do." Her head spun. Tomorrow. She would be married tomorrow, to a king she barely knew, in a kingdom that had been her enemy mere days ago. But the alternative was Valdric. And the alternative was being dragged back to face whatever punishment he had planned for her. "All right," she said. "Tomorrow." The great hall of Thornhaven had been transformed. Silver banners hung from the vaulted ceiling, catching the light of 1,000 candles. The black stone walls gleamed with polished obsidian mirrors that reflected the flames into infinite glittering cascades. And filling every available space was the court. Nobles, warriors, servants, all gathered to witness the impossible. Their king was taking a mate. Senna stood at the entrance of the hall, her hands trembling inside the folds of her gown. The dress was silver silk, cut to flow like water over her curves, with a high collar that concealed her neck and long sleeves that covered her arms entirely. She had designed it herself, working through the night with the castle seamstresses, because tomorrow, when she stood before this court, not an inch of her skin would be visible. "Are you ready, my lady?" Caius asked gently beside her. "No," she wanted to scream. "I'm not ready. I'll never be ready." But she nodded anyway. The doors swung open, and she began to walk. Every eye in the hall turned toward her. The whispers started immediately, a rising tide of shock and speculation that crashed against her from all sides. "Look at how she's covered. Not even her hands are showing. What is she hiding?" Senna kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, where Dristan waited at the far end of the hall. He stood before a great stone altar carved with the symbols of the old gods, his black, formal attire stark against the silver decorations surrounding him. As she approached, she saw his eyes widen slightly, not at her dress, but at her face. She hadn't covered that. She couldn't, not without raising more questions than she was willing to answer. So her face was bare, her features exposed to every curious stare. But it wasn't her face that held secrets. She reached the altar and stopped beside him. Up close, she could feel the cold radiating from his body, that unnatural chill that seemed to intensify the longer she stood near him. "You look beautiful," he murmured, too quietly for anyone else to hear. "You look cold," she replied without thinking. Something almost like amusement flickered in his eyes. "I'm always cold." The priest began the ceremony, his voice echoing through the silent hall. Senna barely heard the words. She was too aware of the man beside her, Isho, of the weight of hundreds of stairs pressing against her back, of the magnitude of what she was about to do. "Do you, Drystan of House Thornwood, Alpha King of Thornhaven, take this woman as your mate, your queen, your bond?" "I do." "And do you, Senna of House Ashford, accept this man as your mate, your king, your bond?" Senna swallowed hard. "I do." "Then by the laws of gods and wolves, I pronounce you mated. You may seal your bond." The hall went utterly still. Sealing the bond traditionally required a bite. The male's teeth piercing the female's neck, marking her permanently as his. But that would require exposing her throat. That would require revealing skin she had specifically chosen to hide. Drystan turned to face her, and she saw understanding in his eyes. "I will not bite you tonight," he said, his voice pitched to carry. "The full bonding will occur in private, as is the right of any mated pair." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was irregular. This was strange. But no one dared challenge their king. Instead, Drystan took her gloved hand and lifted it to his lips. The kiss was brief, formal, and exactly what she needed. "My queen," he said, still holding her hand. "Welcome to Thornhaven." The crowd erupted into applause, though Senna could hear the questions threading through the celebration. Why didn't he mark her? What is she hiding? This marriage is cursed from the start, mark my words. But one voice cut through the noise with razor precision. "How touching. The frost wolf takes a mystery bride." A chill spiked through Senna's veins, sharp and sudden. She knew that voice. She would know it anywhere, in any crowd, across any distance. The crowd parted, and there she stood. Marin, her half-sister, dressed in Vanthros gold, her beautiful face twisted into a smile that held nothing but poison. "I do hope I'm not interrupting," Marin continued, her eyes fixed on Senna with venomous triumph. "I've come bearing a message from King Valdric himself." Drystan's hand tightened on Senna's. The ambassador wasn't due until tomorrow. Plans changed. Marin's smile widened. "When my king learned his former betrothed was about to marry his greatest rival, he felt the situation required immediate attention." She pulled a scroll from her sleeve and held it up for all to see. "A formal accusation," Marin announced, her voice ringing through the hall. "Against the woman now calling herself your queen, an accusation of high treason, murder, and crimes against the crown of Vanthros." The hall exploded into chaos. "Lies." Drystan's voice cut through the uproar like a blade through silk. The single word carried such authority that the entire hall fell silent instantly. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't needed to. "Whatever accusations Valdric has manufactured," Drystan continued, his tone deathly calm, "they hold no weight in my kingdom. Senna is my queen now. She is under my protection. And anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me personally." Marin's smile didn't waver. "How noble. But surely even you can't ignore charges this serious." "Murder, Your Majesty. She killed a man in cold blood." Senna's chest constricted. "No. Not this. Not here." "Allegedly killed," Drystan corrected. "And Vanthros law has no jurisdiction here. If Valdric wishes to pursue this matter, He can submit a formal request through proper diplomatic channels. Until then, his ice-blue eyes fixed on Marin with lethal intensity. You will address my queen with appropriate respect, or you will leave my hall in chains. The threat hung in the air like frost. Marin's composure cracked, just for a moment. Then she smoothed her expression and executed a mockery of a curtsy. Of course, Your Majesty, I meant no disrespect to your queen. The word dripped with contempt. I'm merely a humble messenger. The accusations are Valdrick's, not mine. Then your message has been delivered. Drystan released Senna's hand and stepped toward her sister. And even from behind, Senna could see the tension coiling in his shoulders. Guards will escort you to chambers where you will remain until tomorrow. Then you will return to Vanthros with my formal response. And what response would that be? Drystan leaned close to Marin, close enough that his words would reach only her ears. Senna watched her sister's face drain of color, watched her confident smile crumble into something approaching fear. When Drystan straightened, his expression was perfectly serene. Take her, he said to the guards. Marin was led away, casting one last venomous glance at Senna before disappearing through the side doors. The moment she was gone, Drystan turned back to the assembled court. The celebration continues. My queen and I thank you for witnessing our union. A pause. We will retire now to complete the bonding in private. He offered Senna his arm. She took it, grateful for the support as her legs threatened to give out beneath her. Together, they walked through the hall, through the whispers and stares, through the weight of 1,000 questions she couldn't answer. Only when they reached his private chambers did Senna let herself breathe. She's lying, she said immediately, the words tumbling out in a rush. Whatever she told Valdrick, whatever accusations she's made. I know. Senna stopped. You know? Drystan closed the door behind them and leaned against it, suddenly looking exhausted. I know your sister is a snake who would say anything to destroy you. I know Valdrick is using her accusations as an excuse to reclaim you, and I know... He fixed her with those penetrating eyes, that whatever happened in Vanthros, you are not a murderer. How can you be so certain? You don't know what I... Because I've seen murderers. His voice went flat, hollow. I've created them. I've been one. And you, Senna, carry many things in your eyes. Guilt, yes. Fear, certainly. But not the emptiness of someone who has taken a life without cause. She stared at him, this strange, cold king who saw too much, who understood things he shouldn't, who had defended her before an entire court without hesitation. There was a man, she heard herself say, my sister's lover. He died in a fire. Drystan didn't react. He simply waited. Everyone believes I killed him. My sister certainly does, or claims to, but Her voice cracked. I don't know what happened that night. I went to confront him. I was so angry, but when I arrived, the fire had already started. I tried to stop it, tried to save him, but I couldn't, and he... She pressed her hands to her face, fighting the tears that threatened to fall. You tried to save him, Drystan said quietly. Not an accusation, an observation. I tried, but my abilities have never been fully under my control. I've hidden them my entire life because when I lose control, things burn. Senna nodded miserably. Things burn. People get hurt. And I can never be sure if it was me or if it was something else entirely. She looked up at him with wet eyes. That's my secret, Drystan. That's what I am. A danger to everyone around me. A monster who can't control her own flames. She expected horror, disgust, fear, at minimum. Instead, Drystan crossed the room and knelt before her, taking her gloved hands in his. Look at me, he commanded gently. She did. I am the Frost Wolf, he said. My touch can freeze blood in veins. My presence drops the temperature in any room I enter. And when I lose control... A shadow passed across his face. People don't burn, Senna. They freeze. They shatter. Understanding crashed over her. You're like me, she whispered. I'm exactly like you. His grip tightened. Two monsters, both terrified of what we might do, both locked in cages of our own making. He raised her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles through the fabric of her gloves. Perhaps that's why I recognized you in that forest. Perhaps that's why I couldn't turn away. A tremor ran through her. You should have told me. As should you. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. We're equally guilty of concealment. Then what do we do now? Dryston rose, drawing her up with him. Now we rest. Tomorrow I deal with your sister and whatever games Valdric is playing. Tonight. He guided her toward a doorway she hadn't noticed before. We simply survive until morning. The doorway led to a bedchamber connected to his study. Senna hesitated at the threshold. I won't touch you, Drystan said quietly, reading her tension. Not until you want me to. We can share this space without... It's not that. She turned to face him. It's your temperature. If we're near each other all night, won't you? Freeze you? He shook his head. I can control it when I'm conscious. It's only when I sleep that the cold becomes... unpredictable. Then I'll stay warm. Before she could second-guess herself, Senna pulled off her gloves. Her bare hands glowed faintly in the darkness, warmth radiating from her palms like captured sunlight. Drystan stared at her hands, transfixed. Fire and ice, Senna murmured. Maybe we'll balance each other out. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and took her bare hand in his. The sensation was extraordinary. Her heat met his cold at the point of contact, neither overwhelming the other. Instead, they merged into something temperate, something comfortable, and something that felt inexplicably right. That's never happened before, Drystan breathed. I've never touched anyone without hurting them. Neither have I. They stood in the darkness, hands intertwined, both trembling with the magnitude of what they'd just discovered. Senna didn't know who moved first. Perhaps they moved together. But somehow, she found herself in his arms, her cheek pressed against his chest, listening to the slow, steady beat of his heart. He was still cold. She was still warm. But together, they were something new. We should sleep, Drystan murmured against her hair. Yes. Neither of them moved. Senna. Whatever accusations your sister brings tomorrow, whatever Valdric demands, I want you to know something. He tilted her chin up until she met his eyes. I chose you. Not because you were available, not because you were convenient, but because from the moment I saw you standing alone in my forest, I knew you were extraordinary. And I will burn down both kingdoms before I let anyone take you from me. The fierceness in his voice stole her breath. That's a dangerous promise, she whispered. I'm a dangerous man. His thumb traced her jawline, leaving a trail of frost that somehow didn't feel cold. Sleep now, little flame. Tomorrow we go to war. They lay down together, still clothed, still cautious, but his arm curled around her waist, and her warmth seeped into his frozen bones, and somewhere in the darkness, something that had been dormant for a very long time began to wake. Senna woke to warmth. Real warmth. The kind she hadn't felt in someone else's presence since childhood. She lay perfectly still, cataloging sensations. The solid chest beneath her cheek, the arm wrapped securely around her waist, the steady rhythm of breathing that told her Drystan was still asleep. Sometime during the night, they'd shifted. She was curled against him now, her body fitted to his as if they'd always slept this way. And most remarkably, she wasn't burning him. He wasn't freezing her. They'd found equilibrium. She tilted her head to study his face in the pale morning light. Sleep had softened his features, erasing the cold mask he wore during waking hours. Like this, he looked younger, more vulnerable. She could see the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the tension that lingered even in unconsciousness. What dreams haunt you? She wondered. What made you into the frost wolf? As if sensing her scrutiny, his eyes opened. For a moment, confusion flickered across his face, then understanding, then something warmer that made her pulse quicken. "You're still here," he murmured. "Where else would I be?" "Most people can't tolerate my presence for long." His arm tightened around her waist. "The cold drives them away." "I'm not most people." "No." His hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch leaving a pleasant tingle against her skin. "You're certainly not." They lay there in comfortable silence, neither willing to break the spell of the moment. Outside, Senna could hear the castle coming to life, servants moving through corridors, guards changing shifts, the distant clatter of the kitchens preparing breakfast. But in here, in this bed, the world had shrunk to just the two of them. "I should deal with your sister," Dristan said finally, though he made no move to rise, "and compose my response to Valdric." "What will you say?" "That his accusations are rejected. That his former betrothed is now my queen and beyond his reach. That any attempt to reclaim you will be considered an act of war." His jaw tightened. "And that, if he sends that venomous creature to my court again, I'll return her in pieces." "She's still my sister." "She's a threat to your life, and your happiness. That makes her my enemy." Senna pushed herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. "You barely know me, Dristan, and we met 5 days ago. And yet you're willing to go to war for me?" "Yes." "Why?" He reached up and cupped her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone. "Because I have lived my entire life surrounded by people who fear me. People who serve me out of terror or duty, never affection. I have never had someone look at me the way you do, as if I'm more than a weapon, more than a curse." His voice dropped. "You touched me last night, Senna. Willingly, knowing what I am, and you didn't flinch. Neither did you." "No." A smile ghosted across his lips. "I suppose I didn't?" He sat up, and she instantly mourned the loss of his closeness. But before she could speak, he leaned forward and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Gentle, reverent, achingly tender. "Stay here," he said. "Rest. And I'll handle the ambassador and send word when it's safe." "I want to come with you." "Senna. She's my sister. These are accusations against me. I refuse to hide while others fight my battles." She met his gaze with stubborn determination. "I'm your queen now. Let me act like one." Pride flickered in his eyes. "Very well. But you stay by my side the entire time. If things escalate, then we face them together." The confrontation took place in the throne room. Marin stood before the raised dais, her Vanthros gold garish against the silver and black of Thornhaven's aesthetic. Behind her waited a small contingent of Valdric's guards, an honor escort that felt more like a veiled threat. Senna sat beside Dristan on a throne that had been hastily installed overnight. Her throne. The reality of it still felt surreal. "King Valdric demands the return of his betrothed," Marin announced, her voice ringing through the chamber. "The accusations of treason and murder cannot be ignored. She must face justice in Vanthros." "She is not his betrothed," Dristan replied coolly. "She is my wife, my queen, my mate. Valdric's claims are meaningless." "The crimes were committed before your marriage." Marin's lip curled. "Vanthros law is clear. A criminal cannot escape justice simply by fleeing to another kingdom." "And what evidence supports these crimes?" "Eyewitness testimony." Marin smiled, and Senna's stomach dropped. "My own. I saw my sister standing over Lord Brennan's burning body. I heard her confession." "That's a lie," Senna cut in, unable to stay silent any longer. "I never confessed to anything because I didn't do anything. You know that, Marin. You know I loved Brennan." Something ugly flashed across her sister's face. "You loved him so much you killed him when he chose me instead." "He was already dead when I arrived. The fire had already started. I tried to save him." "You set the fire, your cursed magic." "Enough." Dristan's voice cracked like ice shattering. Both sisters fell silent. He rose from his throne, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Guards shivered. Breath became visible. Frost crept across the stone floor, spreading outward from where he stood. I have heard your accusations, Dryston said, each word precisely articulated. I have seen your evidence, which amounts to the word of a jealous sibling against my queen, and I have made my judgment. He descended the steps of the dais until he stood directly before Marin, towering over her. You will return to Valdric with my response. Queen Senna remains in Thornhaven, under my protection, beyond his reach. If he pursues this matter further, I will consider it an act of aggression against my kingdom. You're making a mistake, Marin hissed. She's dangerous. You have no idea what she's capable of. I know exactly what she's capable of. Drystan's smile was winter-given form. Why do you think I married her? Marin paled. Furthermore, Drystan continued, I am issuing a formal accusation of my own against you, Lady Marin, for conspiracy to commit murder. The hall erupted in gasps. What? Marin stumbled backward. You can't. That's absurd. Is it? Drystan circled her slowly. You claim to have witnessed your sister murder a man you loved, and yet you waited months to bring these accusations forward. Why? Because Senna was useful as Valdric's betrothed, and you needed to wait until she was vulnerable. He stopped directly behind her, his breath frosting the air near her ear. Or perhaps because you're the one who actually killed him, and you needed a convenient scapegoat. That's not true, isn't it? Lord Brennan was leaving you for Senna, everyone knew it. You were humiliated, discarded. And then suddenly he dies in a mysterious fire, and your sister takes the blame. Drystan's eyes glittered. I've had my people investigating since the moment you arrived. Would you like to know what they found? Marin's confident facade crumbled entirely. You're bluffing. A witness, Drystan said softly. A servant who saw you enter Lord Brennan's chambers that night carrying alchemical accelerants, rare substances that burn with unnatural intensity and leave only ash behind. The kind that would make any fire appear supernatural, impossible to trace. A servant who was paid handsomely to remain silent, but whose silence has now been purchased by me. The blood drained from Marin's face. No, she whispered. No, you can't prove. I can prove anything I want within these walls. Drystan's voice hardened to diamond. You framed your sister for murder. You destroyed her life to cover your own crime. And now you dare stand in my court and demand I hand her over to face execution for something you did? He gestured to his guards. Take her. Wait! Marin screamed as guards seized her arms. You can't do this. Valdric, Drystan interrupted, will receive my full report along with the witness testimony. He can decide whether to pursue justice for Lord Brennan's actual murderer or whether to continue protecting a woman who made a fool of him. Marin was dragged away, her screams echoing through the hall until they faded into silence. Senna sat frozen on her throne, her mind reeling. Marin. All this time it had been Marin, the fire, the accusation, and the years of guilt she'd carried. She hadn't killed Brennan. She had never killed anyone. Drystan returned to the dais and knelt before her throne, taking her trembling hands in his. Did you know? She whispered. Before today? I suspected. The timing was too convenient. Your sister's accusations too perfectly timed. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. I needed her to incriminate herself publicly. Tears spilled down Senna's cheeks, tears of relief, of grief, of overwhelming gratitude. She was my sister, my blood, and all this time. I know. Drystan rose and pulled her into his arms, right there in front of the entire court, cradling her against his chest as she wept. I know, but it's over now. She can never hurt you again. Senna clung to him, this cold king who had become her salvation, and felt something crack open inside her heart. It felt terrifyingly like hope. The days following Marin's arrest passed in a blur of unexpected contentment. Senna had braced herself for awkwardness, for the slow unraveling of whatever fragile connection she and Drystan had formed. After all, he had married her for political convenience. Now that the immediate threat had been neutralized, surely he would retreat behind his walls of ice. But he didn't. Instead, he sought her company at every opportunity. Breakfast in her chambers became their ritual, sharing quiet meals while discussing the day ahead. He asked her opinions on matters of state, listened to her suggestions with genuine interest, and implemented more than a few of her ideas. "You have a talent for diplomacy," he told her one morning, reviewing a trade proposal she'd revised. "Valdric was a fool to throw you away." "Valdric saw what he wanted to see," Senna replied, "a potential threat rather than a potential partner." "His loss." Drystan's eyes met hers over the rim of his cup. "My gain?" The warmth in his gaze made her breath catch, and their nights became something she looked forward to with increasing anticipation. They still hadn't consummated the marriage in the traditional sense. Drystan remained achingly respectful of her boundaries, but they slept tangled together, her heat and his cold, finding perfect balance beneath the sheets. Sometimes she woke to find him watching her, those ice-pale eyes soft with an emotion she was afraid to name. Sometimes she watched him sleep, tracing the sharp planes of his face with her gaze, memorizing every detail. She was falling in love with him. The realization struck her one afternoon as she watched him training with his wolves in the courtyard below her window. He moved with lethal grace, his sword an extension of his arm, frost trailing from the blade with every swing. But it was the moment after, when he paused to help a young recruit correct his stance, patient and encouraging despite his fearsome reputation, that cracked something open in her chest. He wasn't the monster Valdric had painted him as. He was lonely and guarded, and desperately starved for genuine connection, just like her. That evening, Senna made a decision. She found him in his study, as usual, surrounded by maps and correspondence. But when she entered, he looked up immediately, and his expression softened in that way that made her heart skip. "Senna." He rose, circling his desk to meet her. "Is everything all right?" "Yes." She closed the distance between them, reaching up to cup his face in her bare hands. "Everything is perfect." Before she could lose her nerve, she kissed him. For one terrifying moment, he went completely still. Then his arms wrapped around her waist, crushing her against him, and he kissed her back with a desperation that stole her breath. This was nothing like the restrained touches they'd shared before. This was fire and ice colliding, consuming, and creating something entirely new. His mouth moved over hers with starving intensity, his hands tangling in her hair, his body pressing her back against his desk. "Senna." Her name was a groan against her lips. "If you don't stop me now." "I don't want to stop you." He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, and she saw the raw need burning beneath his careful control. "Are you certain?" "I'm certain I've never wanted anything more." That was all the permission he needed. He lifted her onto his desk, scattering papers and maps, his mouth finding the column of her throat. She gasped as frost trailed from his lips against her heated skin, the contrast sending shivers cascading down her spine. "More," she breathed. His hands found the fastenings of her gown, and she helped him, desperate to feel his cold skin against her warmth. When the fabric fell away, he made a sound that was almost a growl, his eyes darkening as they traced her exposed form. "Beautiful," he murmured. "Absolutely beautiful." She pulled him closer, claiming his mouth again, losing herself in sensation. Fire sparked beneath her skin wherever he touched, and ice bloomed beneath his palms, and instead of hurting each other, they harmonized, two extremes becoming one. When they finally came together, it was like nothing Senna had ever experienced. The mate bond snapped into place with such force that she cried out, feeling him in her very soul, knowing him in ways that transcended the physical. And she felt something else. Something wrong. Deep inside him, buried beneath layers of ice, was a darkness, a curse, ancient and malevolent, slowly devouring him from within. "Drystan," she gasped, gripping his shoulders. "What is that? What's inside you?" His rhythm faltered. His eyes went wide. Then his whole body convulsed, and the temperature in the room plummeted so violently that the windows cracked. "No," he choked, pulling away from her. "Not yet. I thought I had more time." He collapsed to the floor, frost erupting from his skin, spreading across the stone in jagged crystalline patterns. "Drystan!" Senna dropped beside him, reaching for his hand. It was like touching solid ice. "Run!" he gasped, his eyes losing focus. "Senna, you have to run. And if you stay near me when this happens, I'm not leaving you. You'll freeze." Frost climbed his throat, silencing him. His eyes met hers, terrified and desperate and full of agonized love. Then they froze over, pale and blank as winter sky. And the frost wolf went completely still. "Your Majesty, please, you have to step away from him." Caius's voice penetrated Senna's panic, but she refused to release Drystan's frozen hand. The cold burned her palms, but she welcomed the pain. It meant he was still there. It meant she still had time. "What's happening to him?" she demanded. "Tell me now." The steward's aged face crumpled with grief. "It's the curse, Your Majesty. The Frost Wolf's curse." "Explain." Caius hesitated, then sank into a chair as if his legs could no longer support him. Centuries ago, King Drystan's ancestor wronged a powerful witch, stole her daughter, used her, and discarded her when she no longer suited his purposes. Senna's stomach turned. What kind of curse? The witch condemned his entire bloodline to carry winter in their veins. Each Frost Wolf king grows colder as they age. By 35, they're more ice than flesh. By 40, his voice broke, they freeze completely. Forever. How old is Drystan? 32, Your Majesty. He's been fighting it for years, longer than any of his ancestors. We hoped, he might beat it. Senna looked down at her husband's frozen form. His skin was white as snow, his lips blue, his eyes open but unseeing. The frost that covered him was spreading, claiming more of him with every passing moment. "There must be a way to break it," she said fiercely. "Curses can be broken." The witch left only one possibility. Caius's voice was hollow. "True love's fire," she said. "Only flames born of genuine love could melt the ice, but no one has ever loved a frost wolf truly." "How can you love something that freezes everything it touches?" Senna's heart clenched. "I love him. Your Majesty, I love him," she repeated stronger. "And I have fire, real fire, inside me." She pressed her hands harder against Drystan's chest, willing her warmth to flow into him. "Come back to me, please. I just found you. I can't lose you now." Heat built in her palms. She felt it rising, that familiar pressure that had terrified her all her life. But this time, she didn't fight it. She welcomed it, channeled it, and poured every ounce of her love into the flames that flickered to life against his frozen skin. And the ice hissed, steam rose, and nothing happened. "No." Senna pushed harder, flames dancing across her forearms now, her whole body glowing with desperate heat. "Why isn't it working? Why? Your magic is bound." The voice came from the doorway. Senna spun to find an elderly woman standing there, her eyes sharp and knowing, her gown the deep crimson of dying embers. "Who are you?" "My name is Thessaly." The woman stepped into the room, her gaze fixed on Drystan's prone form. "I was his mother's closest friend, and I've been waiting a very long time for someone like you to arrive." "What do you mean, my magic is bound?" Thessaly crossed to where Senna knelt and placed a wrinkled hand on her shoulder. "Your fire is strong, child, stronger than any I've sensed in generations. But someone locked it away, reduced it to embers when it should be an inferno." "My father," Senna breathed. "After Brennan's death, he had a witch suppress my powers." "Not suppress, bind." Thessaly's expression darkened. "The spell is old and cruel. It allows you access to only a fraction of your true abilities, enough to fear yourself, but never enough to save anyone." "Can you remove it?" "No." The witch shook her head. The binding can only be broken by the one who cast it, or— She hesitated. Or by your true mate, calling your fire forth during the bonding ritual. Senna looked at Drystan. We bonded. Tonight. That's when he— The bond was interrupted before completion. Thessaly's hand tightened on her shoulder. You must understand. The mate bond amplifies our elemental natures. Fire calls to ice. Ice calls to fire. When you joined, his cold surged to meet your flame, but your fire was bound. It tried to rise, tried to answer his call, but the binding held it back. Without your heat to balance him, the cold overwhelmed his body before you could break through. Tears streamed down Senna's face. Then what do I do? How do I save him? Before Thessaly could answer, horns sounded in the distance. War horns. Caius rushed to the window and went pale. Your Majesty, an army approaches from the east, flying Vanthros banners. Senna's blood ran cold. Valdric. He must have learned of Marin's arrest. Caius turned to her with fear in his eyes. He's brought an army to reclaim you, or destroy us for refusing. She looked from the window to Drystan's frozen form, her mind racing. Her husband was dying. An enemy army was at the gates. And her only hope of saving him was locked behind a magical barrier she couldn't break. How long until they reached the castle? Hours at most. Senna stood, flames still flickering at her fingertips. Then we have hours to find another way. Your Majesty, Thessaly said quietly, there may be one other option, but it's dangerous. Tell me. The witch's eyes met hers. The one who bound your magic? Your father? Still lives? Yes. Then he can unbind it. Or— A grim smile crossed her aged face. You can force the binding to break by generating more fire than it can contain. But that would require an emotional catalyst of enormous magnitude. Like what? Thessaly glanced at Drystan's frozen form, then back at Senna. Like watching the man you love die while an army burns your kingdom around you. Horror washed through her. You're saying I need to let things get worse before— I'm saying that sometimes the only way out is through. Thessaly gripped her hands. Your fire is in there, child. It wants to be free. But you've spent your whole life afraid of it. You need to stop being afraid. You need to embrace what you are, fully and completely. And if I can't? Thessaly's expression softened with something like compassion. Then the frost wolf dies. And Valdric claims everything. Valdric's army halted at the gates of Thornhaven as the sun began to set. Senna stood on the battlements, watching the sea of gold banners ripple in the evening wind. Her hands were steady despite the terror coiling in her chest. Behind her, Thornhaven's wolves had assembled, fewer than Valdric's forces, but fiercer, more desperate. They were fighting for their home, for their frozen king, for her. A figure separated from the army and rode forward alone. Even at this distance, Senna recognized the golden hair, the arrogant posture, the gleaming armor that caught the dying light. Valdric. Queen Senna. His voice carried across the field, magically amplified. I've come to negotiate. She leaned over the battlements. There's nothing to negotiate. Leave my kingdom. Your kingdom? Valdric laughed. You've been here barely a fortnight. These people don't know you. They don't want you. They certainly won't die for you. You'd be surprised what people will die for. Valdric's amusement faded. I'm offering you one chance, Senna. Surrender yourself, and I'll spare Thornhaven. My quarrel isn't with these people. It's with you. Why? The question tore from her throat. Why did you throw me away? Why banish me without explanation? I loved you, Valdric. I trusted you. And you threw me to the wolves without a single word. Silence stretched between them. When Valdric spoke again, his voice had lost its mocking edge. There was a prophecy, he said, delivered to me the night before our wedding was to be announced. A seer came to my chambers and spoke of fire and ice, of kingdoms rising and falling. She said you would destroy one king and save another. Senna's breath caught. I had a choice, Valdric continued. Keep you close, and pray I was the king you'd save, or cast you out before you could destroy me." His jaw tightened. "I chose survival. So you sent me to die in the thornwood? I sent you away from me. What happened after wasn't my concern." The casual cruelty of it made her want to scream. All her guilt, all her wondering, all the nights she'd spent agonizing over what she'd done wrong, and it had been nothing, just a prophecy and a coward's fear. "You could have told me," she said. "We could have faced it together. I couldn't take that risk." Valdrick's expression hardened. "But now I understand the prophecy differently. You were always going to destroy a king, Senna. I just ensured it wouldn't be me." He raised his hand, and behind him, his army stirred. "Surrender," he called, "or watch Thornhaven burn." Senna thought of Drystan, frozen in his chambers. She thought of the wolves who had welcomed her despite her being an enemy's cast-off. She thought of Caius and Thessaly and every servant who had shown her kindness, and she thought of the fire burning inside her, caged and desperate to be free. "No," she said. "Then you've chosen death." Valdrick's hand fell, and his army surged forward. The battle was brutal. Thornhaven's wolves fought with everything they had, but they were outnumbered 3-1. The clash of steel and the screams of the dying filled the night air as Valdrick's forces breached the outer walls. Senna fought alongside her people, flames flickering from her palms, but it wasn't enough. The binding held her fire to pitiful sparks, and every enemy she felled was replaced by 3 more. "Your Majesty!" Caius grabbed her arm, pulling her back from the front lines. "You have to retreat to the inner chambers. If Valdrick captures you, I won't hide while my people die." "Then use your fire!" Thessaly appeared beside them, her robes singed, blood on her face. "Break the binding!" "I'm trying." "You're holding back." The witch gripped her shoulders, forcing Senna to meet her eyes. "You're still afraid. After everything, you're still terrified of what you might become." "Because I don't know what I might become. What if I lose control? What if I hurt innocent people?" "They're already dying." Thessaly gestured at the chaos around them. "You can't hurt them more than Valdrick is right now. Stop being afraid, Senna. Stop protecting yourself and protect them." A scream tore through the air, a child's scream, high and terrified. Senna spun to see a young girl, no more than 7, cowering in a doorway as 3 of Valdrick's soldiers advanced on her. Their intentions were written in their leering faces, their bloody swords. Something snapped. The binding that had contained Senna's fire for years, the magical cage her father had built around her power, shattered like glass. Fire exploded from her body. Not the flickering flames she'd grown accustomed to. This was an inferno, a column of white-hot light that roared into the sky and cascaded outward in waves of searing heat. The soldiers threatening the child disintegrated before they could scream. The ground beneath her feet turned to molten glass. And still the fire came, pouring from her in an endless torrent of rage and grief and love. She burned a path through Valdrick's army, leaving nothing but ash in her wake. Soldiers fled screaming, siege towers collapsed. The very air caught fire around her. Through the chaos, she saw Valdrick on his horse, staring at her with naked terror. "Monster!" he screamed. "Yeah, the seer was right. You're a monster." Senna advanced on him, flames dancing around her like a living crown. "You made me this," she said, her voice resonating with power. "You and my father and everyone who tried to cage what I am. But I'm done being afraid." She raised her hand. "Wait!" Valdrick threw himself from his horse, scrambling backward. "Wait, please. I'll withdraw. I'll leave Thornhaven forever. Just let me live." Senna stared at the man she had once loved. The Golden King who had seemed so perfect, so powerful. Now he groveled at her feet, stripped of every pretense. The prophecy said she would destroy a king, but destruction didn't have to mean death. "Go," she said. "Take your army and leave. If I ever see you in these lands again, I won't be so merciful." Valdrick fled. The flames still burned within her as Senna raced through the castle corridors. Valdrick's retreat had bought them time, but it meant nothing if she couldn't save Drystan. The fire that had been caged all her life now roared through her veins, demanding release, demanding purpose. She burst into his chambers to find him exactly as she'd left him, frozen, still, lost somewhere between life and death. Thessaly knelt beside him, her expression grave. "The curse has progressed," the witch said quietly. "He's almost gone." "No." Senna dropped to her knees, pressing her burning hands against his chest. "He is not dying. Not tonight. Not ever." "Your Majesty, even with your full power." "The curse requires true love's fire," Senna interrupted. "That's what you said. Fire born of genuine love." "Yes, but..." "Then watch." She closed her eyes and let herself feel everything. Every moment since Drystan had found her in the forest, every kindness he'd shown her, every touch, every glance, every word that had carved itself into her heart. The way he'd defended her before his court. The way he'd held her through the night. The way he'd looked at her like she was something precious rather than something dangerous. She loved him. Not because he'd saved her, not because he'd married her, but because beneath all that ice was a man who had been waiting his whole life for someone to see him clearly. And she did. She saw him completely. The loneliness and the strength, the fear and the courage, the desperate hope he tried so hard to hide. "I love you," she whispered against his frozen lips. "I love you. Kay, and I'm not letting you go." Fire erupted from her core. But this fire was different. It wasn't the destructive inferno she'd unleashed on the battlefield. This was warmth, pure and gentle and endless, flowing from her heart into his. The ice began to melt. First his chest, where her hands pressed, then his throat, his face, his arms. Steam rose around them as frost gave way to flesh, as winter surrendered to the flames of her love. Color returned to his cheeks, his lips softened from blue to pink. And then, finally, miraculously, his eyes opened. Not the frozen gray they'd become, but the pale blue she remembered. Alive. Aware. "Senna," he breathed. She kissed him before he could say anything else, pouring her fire and her love and her relief into the embrace. His arms came around her, pulling her close. And she felt the warmth in his touch. Real warmth. The warmth of a living body, no longer cursed with eternal winter. "The curse," she gasped when they finally broke apart. "Is it gone?" Thessaly's voice was thick with tears. "I can sense it. The Frost Wolf's curse has been broken, not just for him, for the entire bloodline. Your children will never carry this burden." Drystan cupped Senna's face in his hands that were warm now, truly warm, and stared at her with something like reverence. "You saved me," he said. "You actually saved me. You saved me first." She pressed her forehead to his. "That night in the forest, you gave me a chance when no one else would. You saw me, Drystan, the real me. How could I not fight to keep you?" "The prophecy," he murmured. "Valdric said you would destroy one king and save another. I suppose I did both." She smiled through her tears. "I destroyed his pride, and I saved your life. You saved far more than my life." He kissed her again, softer this time, reverent. "You saved my soul." The weeks that followed were filled with rebuilding. Valdric's withdrawal had been complete, his humiliation so total that rumor said he'd locked himself in his chambers and refused to see anyone. His kingdom, leaderless in all but name, began sending tentative envoys to Thornhaven, seeking trade agreements and treaties. Senna met with each one personally, demonstrating that she was not the monster Valdric had painted her as. She was firm but fair, powerful but merciful, and slowly, the neighboring kingdoms began to see Thornhaven not as a threat, but as an ally. Meryn was tried for Lord Brennan's murder and found guilty. Rather than execution, Senna advocated for exile, a lifetime banishment to the outer territories, stripped of name and title. Some called it weakness. Senna called it closure. "She's still your blood," Drystan observed one evening, watching Marin's carriage disappear over the horizon. Most would have demanded her head. Most aren't trying to build something new. Senna leaned into his side, savoring his warmth. I want Thornhaven to be different. Better. A place where justice doesn't always mean death. My queen, the reformer. He pressed a kiss to her temple. I approve. Thessaly remained at the castle as Senna's magical advisor, helping her learn to control the full extent of her fire. The power that had been caged for so long was vast, greater than either of them had anticipated. But with practice, Senna learned to wield it with precision. You could have been a weapon, Thessaly told her one afternoon, watching her shape flames into intricate patterns. Your father knew that. Valdric knew that. They both tried to use you or destroy you. And instead? The old witch smiled. Instead, you became something far more dangerous. A queen who chose her own destiny. 1 year later, Senna stood on the balcony of Thornhaven, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and gold. Arms wrapped around her from behind, warm and strong. Drystan's chin rested on her shoulder, his breath soft against her ear. The ambassador from Vanthros has arrived, he murmured. They're requesting a formal alliance. Valdric agreed to that? Valdric abdicated 3 months ago. His younger brother rules now, a far more sensible man by all accounts. Senna turned in his arms, studying her husband's face. A year of being curse-free had changed him. He smiled more often now, laughed more freely. The shadows that had haunted his eyes had faded, replaced by a contentment she'd never thought possible. I love you, she said, simply because she could. I know. His smile widened. I love you too. More than I thought myself capable of. The cold king who couldn't feel. She traced his jaw with her fingertips. Look at you now. The fire queen, who is afraid to burn. He caught her hand and kissed her palm. Look at us both. Below the balcony, the castle bustled with life. Servants preparing for the diplomatic reception, wolves training in the courtyard, children playing in the gardens. Thornhaven had transformed from a place of cold isolation into something vibrant and alive. And in a few more months, it would welcome its heir. Senna's hand drifted to her stomach, still flat but no longer empty. She hadn't told Drystan yet. She was waiting for the right moment. But as if sensing her thoughts, his gaze dropped to where her hand rested. His eyes widened. Senna, are you? Yes. His face transformed with joy so pure it stole her breath. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around, laughing with an abandon she'd never heard from him before. A child, he breathed, our child, free of the curse, free of everything that haunted us, free to choose their own path. Senna cupped his face in her hands. Free to be loved without conditions, without secrets, without fear. I was so certain I would die alone, Drystan whispered. That winter would claim me before I ever knew what warmth felt like. But you changed everything. We changed each other. She kissed him as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the world in fire and gold. Behind them lay the shadows of their pasts, rejection and curses, betrayal and fear. Before them stretched a future neither had dared to imagine. The Alpha King had sent her away at dawn. By nightfall, his rival had found her. And in finding her, he had found himself.